Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Putra Pangestu. I am a student of Ajhi Maritime University, study program of the Faculty of Teacher Education, English Education. This video is for a presentation on cross-cultural understanding, culture shock, and culture conflict. What is culture shock and what causes it? Culture shock is a sudden and disturbing impression on the mind or the own concept of culture, produced by some unwelcome occurrence or perception in a foreign culture, lasting depression, a thrill, or an excited feeling of any kind. The term culture shock was first mentioned in literature by Calvero Oberg in 1690s. In his article, Oberg defined the culture shock as follows. Culture shock is precipitated by the anxiety that results from losing all our familiar signs and symbols of social intercourse. These signs or cues include the thousand and one ways in which we orient ourselves to the situations of daily life. Object refers to the visual aspect of cultural-like behavior, language, and customs because in contrast to values and beliefs they can be observed. The fact that people tend to judge visual aspects applying their own values and beliefs is a response for the anxiety. Many scientists deal with the phenomenon of culture shock and found on definitions, but most of them stick very closely to the one Ober gave in 1960. Hofstad, for example, states that culture shock is a state of distress following the transfer of a person to an unfamiliar cultural environment, which may also be accompanied by physical symptoms. For Buck, it is a disturbing feeling of disorientation and helplessness produced by the direct exposure to an alien society, and Elizabeth Marx just called it the experience of foreignness. All of these definitions have in common that they see culture shock as an unpleasant reaction to being faced with a foreign culture. The symptoms of culture shock. Uh, there, there are several of the symptoms of culture shock. The first one is common symptoms of culture shock: extreme homesickness, feelings of helplessness or dependency, disorientation and isolation, depression and sadness. Hyper Hyper-irritability may include inappropriate anger and hostility. Sleep and eating disturbance, too little or too much, excessive critical reactions to host culture or stereotyping. Hypochondria, excessive drinking, recreational drug dependency, extreme concerns over sanitation, safety, even paranoia, and being taken advantage of, loss of focus and ability to complete tasks. The symptoms of culture shock are quite varied and can be easily misunderstood or even overlooked because they are similar to reactions that can occur in everyday life. The link between culture shock and what you are feeling at a given moment may be difficult to see. It is very common for people experiencing culture shock to not only deny the possibility that culture shock might be the problem, but to shift the focus, attributing their stress wholly to behavior or values of the people around them. The stage of culture shock. The first one is the honeymoon stage. The first stage of culture shock is often overwhelmingly positive, during which travelers become infatuated with the language, people and food in their new surroundings. At this stage, the trip or move seems like the greatest decisions ever made. An exciting adventure to stay on forever. On short trips, the honeymoon phase may take over the entire experience as the later effects of culture shock don't have time to set in. On longer trips, the honeymoon stage will usually phase out eventually. The second one is the frustration stage. Frustration may be the most difficult stage of culture shock and is probably familiar to anyone who has lived abroad or who travels frequently. At this stage, the fatigue of not understanding gesture signs and the language sets in and miscommunication may be happening frequently. Small things, losing keys, missing the bus, or not being able easily order food in a restaurant may trigger frustration. And while frustration comes and goes, it's a natural reaction for people spending extended time in new countries. Bursts of depression or homesickness and feelings of longing to go home where things are familiar and comfortable are all common during the frustration stage. The third one is the adjustment stage. Frustrations are often subdued as travelers begin to feel more familiar and comfortable with the cultures, people, food, and language of new environments. Navigation becomes easier, friends and communities of support are established, and details of local language may become more recognizable during the adjustment stage. The first one is the acceptance stage. Generally, though sometimes weeks, months, or years after wrestling with the emotional stage outlined above, the final stage of culture shock is acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean that new cultures or environments are completely understood. Rather, it signifies a realization that complete understanding isn't necessary to function and thrive in the new surrounding. During the acceptance stage, travelers have the familiarity and are able to draw together the research they need to feel at ease. Next is the coping culture shock. Many people who travel or live overseas experience what is commonly referred to as culture shock. During the first stage, often described as the honeymoon, everything you see and do in the country you are visiting is exciting and positive. But in the second stage, known as culture shock, you can feel a sense of dislocation and general unease. To cope with culture shock, learn to recognize its symptoms. You feel angry, uncomfortable, confused, frustrated, or irritable and lose your sense of humor. You withdraw and spend excessive amounts of time alone, only with other foreigners, and avoid contact with the local people. You develop negative feelings about the people and culture of the host country. You eat and drink compulsively or need an excessive amount of sleep. You are bored, fatigued, and unable to concentrate or work effectively. During the third and final adjustment stage, you start to accept your new surroundings and make a compromise between the honeymoon and culture shock phases. The coping strategies. This is probably the best strategy for coping with the various impacts of culture shock is to make a conscious effort to adjust to the new culture. Here are some suggestions on how to make yourself feel more at home in your new surroundings. Admit frankly that these impacts exist. It is not a sign of weakness to admit that you feel uncomfortable, tense, or confused. Learn the rules of living in your host country. Try to understand how and why the local people act the way they do. Their behavior and customs, although they may be different from your own, are neither better nor worse than what you are used to. Get involved in some aspect of the new culture, whether you study art or music, or learn a new sport or martial art. Being an interested student will make a world of difference. Take time to learn the language. It always helps to understand as much as possible of what people are saying. They will appreciate your effort to communicate with them in the language, even if it is just a few simple phrases, and it will make your daily life much easier. Take care of yourself. Eat well, exercise, and take the time to sleep. Limit your alcohol consumption to moderate amounts. Travel. Take the time to be a tourist and explore the countryside. Make friends and develop relationships. Getting to know local people will help you overcome cultural differences and understand the country. It will also show you how to be more sensitive to cultural norms and expectations. Maintain contact with friends and family back home. Writing home about your experience and problems can help you sort through them. It is also a good idea to keep a journal of your feelings and thoughts. Do something that reminds you of home. Listening to your favorite music or practicing a familiar hobby can boost your spirits when you are feeling homesick. Avoid idealizing life back home. Try to make the most of your stay and consciously adopt an open mind. And the next one is a cultural conflict. What is cultural conflict? A cultural conflict is a dislike, hostility, or struggle between communities who have different philosophies and ways of living, resulting in contradictory experiences and behaviors. The notion originates from sociological conflict theories and anthropological concepts of intercultural relations. Intensive development of tourism as part of globalizing trends often leads to rapid changes in local cultures of exotic territories. The negative consequences of modernization contribute the intensification of conflicts caused by alternative perceptions of the world determined by different systems of cultural values and beliefs, including axionormative conditions. Cultural conflicts are often provoked by the socio-economic situation in given communities. For a conflict to occur, there must be a direct interaction between at least two different cultures. In tourism, this often occurs on the host-guest axis and may arise from tourist expectations towards towards the product. The cause of cultural conflict. Cultural conflict intensify is the phenomenon. Interest conflict intensify is the cause. The deterioration of the real value, resource, and environment. Population ratio is the main reason interest conflict intensify cause the moral conflicts and the so-called cultural conflicts intensify. This cultural conflict is the made-up concept. When there are plenty to eat and not many people around, there will not be conflict of any kind. When there is nothing to eat but lots of people around, cultural or not, there will be deadly conflict. As a matter of fact, cultures don't conflict. There is only one absolute truth in the universe. All cultures convergence to this absolute truth. All intelligent lives do the same in the whole universe. Due to real value is intrinsically limited and human activities cannot create it, but human survival solely depend on it, and population naturally overgrowing. So material interest conflict. Moral is based on material interest. Therefore, moral conflicts serve material interest competition. The so-called cultural conflicts are undercover interest conflicts. It is the euphemism continuation of racial conflict and class conflict theories. Dealing with cultural conflict. The best way to resolve or handle cultural conflict is by learning about other cultures. Organizations work in diverse environments. This gives people the opportunity to interact regardless of culture. When 2018, it may also prevent cross-cultural conflicts by allowing someone to learn about a specific culture before potential conflict arise. Authors Abramson and Remington suggest the person involved in cross-cultural conflicts must be careful not to assume that the perception and the values of the persons involved in the conflict are the same. Abramson, Remington, 2018, page 18, paragraph. This may be difficult due to the new thinking it requires. Knowledge of cross-cultural conflict can be obtained through various training programs, reading, and simply talking to people of diverse cultures. In understanding cultural conflict, Abramson and Remington suggest, perhaps less obvious to those embroiled in conflicts, we also need to be respectful and maintain cordiality, even when we disagree. Whether it is negative or positive outlook, an understanding of how each culture and handles conflict is the best way to preventing matters to worse. Conflict may result in a positive or negative outcome. It provides the necessary experience to teach diversity. It is an essential tool that builds healthy relationships in organizations. It is common for people to disagree with each other. These disagreements come from different views we share. How we choose to handle conflicts shows just how diverse our cultures are. There is no such thing as one right culture. If we can all come together to learn about our differences, we have a good shot in identifying and resolving cultural conflicts. Alright, that's all for my video. Thank you for watching. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.